So hello, everyone. Welcome to Leader Associates Impact. Today, we are more than delighted to speak with Mr. Isshu Kikuma, Japan Energy Analyst from Bloomberg NEF, and to discuss about the changing power market in Japan and the role of solar in this rapid evolution. Isshu is based in Tokyo to support Bloomberg NEF's research activity for the Japan market. Personally, he is also dedicated to the solar and the sustainability market for over 5 years. I'm really looking forward to hearing his insights. And Isshu, I thank you again for being here. How are you feeling today?
Good. Thank you for inviting me to here. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you. So the overall structure of today is quite simple, combining a brief market presentation plus one-on-one Q&A. Firstly, may I invite you to say hello to all the audience and then start your presentation.
Cool. Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Isshu Kikuma. I cover Japan's renewable energy market at Bloomberg NEF. And yeah, let me share my screen. Yeah. So today's presentation will be about market trends in Japan's solar sector. And before diving into my presentation, just wanted to quickly introduce Bloomberg NEF. So Bloomberg NEF or BNEF is a research division under Bloomberg, and we have 250 staff members across the globe. And our key research coverage is decarbonization and energy transition. And here is the kind of whole picture of Bloomberg NEF's research coverage. So for commodity, we have gas, LNG, oil, coal, and power. And other key research area for the decarbonization, we have the clean power, advanced transport, buildings, and industry. And we also cover hydrogen and CCS carbon capture technologies as cross-cutting technologies as well. And yeah, let me dive into the presentation. So here are 3 key messages from my presentation. So the first one is that Japan will see fewer new solar builds over the next few years due to the several challenges that the market is facing. However, we'll still expect more new solar projects to be installed in the long run in Japan. And one of the key opportunities for the solar sector is that a lot of companies are interested in procuring clean electricity from renewable energy projects, and solar is one of the biggest technologies that they're looking at. So let me start my presentation with what's going on in the market. So this chart shows the historic solar installation in Japan. And as many people here are probably aware, but feed-in tariff introduced in 2012 actually kicked off Japan's renewable energy market. And in 2012 to 2014, feed-in tariff for solar were quite high. The feed-in tariff was around 36 to 40 yen per kilowatt hour. And that's how Japan was able to attract a lot of interest in the solar sector from developers and investors. So if you look at this chart for 2014 to 2015, installed volume is about 10 to 11 gigawatt in DC, and this is quite high. However, after 2015, you can see that fewer solar installations are installed in Japan. And this is because the government reduced the subsidies every year. So yeah, that's what we are seeing in the market. But if you look at the installation in 2020, you see a spike there. And that's when the government introduced or set the new operational deadlines for the legacy projects. So the legacy projects are basically the project which secured feed-in tariff subsidy certification back in 2012 to 2014. And at that time, government didn't have the operational deadlines for those projects, meaning those projects could have built anytime when developers and investors wanted. However, there were too many legacy projects like those around that time. So the government decided to implement the new operational deadlines for those legacy projects. And that's why a lot of developers actually rushed to commission in 2020. And in 2021, the installed volume was 6.4 gigawatts in Japan. And if we move the timeline a little bit, here is the forecast for the Japan's solar in the near term. So overall, we expect Japan to build less projects in the short term. And this is based on the results of the past solar auction, which didn't do well, and also fewer new applications for the feed-in tariff projects that we have seen in the market. And there are a few other hurdles that solar developers and solar markets are currently facing in Japan. And I'm going to go through each hurdle in the following slides. So the first one is feed-in premium. So feed-in premium was introduced from this fiscal year in Japan, and the feed-in premium is applied to solar projects over larger than 1 megawatt. And there are key differences between feed-in premium projects and also feed-in tariff projects. And one of them is how the subsidies are determined. So for feed-in tariff, subsidies are basically fixed for 20 years. So meaning like developers or project owner didn't have much risk around the revenue because it's fixed for 20 years. However, for feed-in premium, subsidies are fluctuating based on the wholesale power prices. So it's riskier than feed-in tariff. And one of the problems here is that in Japan, it's very difficult to forecast wholesale power prices because of the limited information around Japan's wholesale market, such as which power plants are selling electricity and how much they're actually selling at the market, or the real-time information around the demand and supply curve balance. So it's very difficult to forecast power prices, and this is a quite big risk, because if developers or investors wants to guess how much their project could make under feed-in tariff, or sorry, feed-in premium, this is very difficult things to do. And another difference between feed-in premium and feed-in tariff is that feed-in premium project owners or the developers have to find the project off-takers. And the third difference is that feed-in premium project owners have to manage imbalance between actual and forecast power generation every 30 minutes. And this requirement didn't exist for the feed-in tariff projects. So this is basically something that new projects have to develop from scratch in terms of the technology development. That's why it's possible that it might take some time to reduce the cost for the imbalance to accurately forecast the imbalance to reduce the penalties. And the chart on the right-hand side shows the latest solar auction results. So Japan had the first feed-in premium solar auction in June, and if you look at the left bar there, that's the result for the feed-in premium. So the auction size was 175 megawatts, but auction was basically undersubscribed and only awarded 129 megawatts of the solar capacity. And this result probably highlights the little interest from market players because of the riskier subsidy scheme. Basically, that's feed-in premium compared to feed-in tariff. And there are more challenges for the solar market. So one of them is basically the high cost of renewables. So this is not unique to solar, and this applies to the wind projects, but Japan's renewables are expensive, especially compared with the other markets. So this chart shows the levelized cost of electricity for solar projects and in several selected countries. And if you look at the high end of each bar, you can see that Japan's solar projects are the most expensive globally. And there are a few reasons for this. And one of the main reasons is that due to land scarcity, some projects in Japan, some solar projects in Japan are actually built in the middle of the mountain, and also sometimes in hilly sites. And according to our research, building projects in those sites require land development, such as removing trees or perhaps flattening sites. And this land development cost is quite expensive. And also this is a quite unique CapEx component if you think about solar projects globally. And also due to land scarcity, it's very difficult to achieve economies of scale in Japan. So that push up the project's cost compared to other markets such as India, China, Australia, and the US. Another thing is that solar cost reduction in Japan have slowed down recently. So this chart shows the levels of subsidy in solid line and also Japan's solar LCOE trend in the yellow dot line. And one of the interesting trends here is that cost reduction, which in the yellow dot line has been stalled over the last few years, especially if you look at the, I guess, line after 2017, even though the government keeps reducing subsidies for a while. And what this means is that some project developers may feel that current subsidy levels may be too low to make their solar project economically viable. And the reason why we are seeing stalled cost reduction for solar projects is that now it's getting difficult to find good project sites. So a lot of good project sites, which are typically like flat and large scale project sites, are already taken by the existing projects. That means if project wants to kind of reduce the cost, developers have to find project sites which doesn't require much land development. But because most of the sites are already taken or occupied by existing projects, it's very difficult to find, and hence the cost reduction has been stalled recently. And to make things worse, recently materials costs have increased quite a lot, and this pushed up equipment costs for solar projects. So the chart here shows price levels of different items since the start of 2020. And basically this chart shows the price levels when we assume the one for the price at the start of 2020, and steel is in light blue, and aluminum in purple, polysilicon in yellow, copper in light green, shipping costs in red, and also the module prices in green. And as you can see, all of the items have increased the prices since 2020, and the most notable cost increase can be seen in the shipping cost in red and also polysilicon in yellow. And a combination of these basically impacted the module prices, as many people in the market are already aware. So these challenges that I mentioned definitely have been impacting solar markets, and that's why we are expecting fewer solar new builds over the next few years. However, we still expect Japan's solar market to see the uptake, especially in the late 2020s. So this chart is basically the Japan solar forecast, and up to 2030. And you see that from mid 2020, we expect the uptake of the solar market in Japan. And one of the biggest reasons of our optimistic view around Japan's solar forecast is due to cost decline. So this chart shows LCOE for different technologies, specifically for solar, CCGT, and coal power plants. So currently, solar projects are more expensive than new CCGT and new coal power plants. But from the mid 2020s, we expect new solar project will be cheaper than new CCGT and new coal power plants. What this means is that when investors or developers consider building a new power plant around that time, after 2020, mid 2020s, solar will be the most economic option for them to build. And that's why we expect the uptake of the solar project around that time. Another key driver for the Japan solar uptake is that in Japan, a lot of corporations are interested in sourcing clean electricity from renewable energy projects, and mainly for solar. So in Japan, a lot of corporations are interested in clean power procurement. And if you look at the number of RE100 initiative, which is basically the initiative in which companies are trying to offset the electricity use with 100% renewables, the number of RE100 company in Japan is about more than 70, which is the second highest after the US. So this is quite high. And there are a few or several ways for Japanese corporation or corporation in Japan to source clean electricity. And one of the growing mechanisms available in Japan is corporate PPAs using offsite projects. So the chart here shows the volume of corporate PPAs in Japan. And if you look at 2019 and 2020, the announced volume was less than 2 megawatts, but the volume jumped to 90 megawatts in 2021. And if you look at 2022, this chart only shows data up to the end of May, but it's already higher than 2021's number. And yeah, so far we see 164 megawatts for the corporate PPAs in Japan. What this means is that we're going to see the record high for the corporate PPAs announced in 2022 this year. So yeah, this is a quite exciting area, and I think definitely market players should keep an eye on what's going on around the corporate PPAs or corporate clean power procurement market, because we expect more and more companies, especially in RE100 initiatives, should take actions. And I think they're going to use more different options to source clean electricity. And yeah, I think that's the end of my presentation. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Isshu. Can you see me now? Yes, I think it's time to quit the screen sharing.
Yeah.
And let's come to the Q&A part. Just one moment. Yes, thank you so much for the very informative presentation. And I think the key word of today is changing. The Japan market is changing, the global market is changing, and apparently the most heated topic today is the energy crisis globally and also potentially in Japan. So how do you think the current energy crisis has impacted roles of renewables?
Yeah, so I think the current energy crisis highlighted, first of all, the vulnerability of Japan's energy security, because Japan relied on fossil fuel imports quite a lot. And I think the current energy crisis highlighted that the benefit of renewables in the energy is, I guess, yeah, in terms of energy security. So Japan's, I think, power systems, as I said, rely on fossil fuel imports quite a lot. And because of that, the marginal cost of generation of fossil fuel generation has gone up quite a lot. And this basically impacted power prices. And I think as a lesson from this energy crisis, I think Japanese government should acknowledge the benefit of scaling up renewables, because once renewables are built, they don't require fossil fuel for operation. And I think, yeah, definitely government should acknowledge this perspective as well. And I guess this is kind of related to your question, but now Japanese government and also the electric utilities in Japan are trying to scale up the use of hydrogen co-firing, ammonia co-firing in fossil fuel power plants, and also the use of carbon capture technologies at those fossil fuel power plants. And I mean, that's another way of doing, that's one way of doing the decarbonization for the power generation. But at the same time, if Japan actually keep pursuing that pathway, follows that pathway, that means Japan would need to keep importing fossil fuels from other countries. And I think that could be, basically doesn't help energy security in Japan. And if something similar happens in the future, Japan may repeat the same mistake or the incident that we are seeing right now. So I think, yeah, renewables have a lot of potential in terms of energy security for Japan.
Right, you're absolutely right about the energy security issue. I think a lot of countries have been adopting renewables as their tool for energy independence. And next question, narrowing down to the solar, we all know that Japan expecting for a huge growth over the next decade. And will Japan's multi-gigawatt growth appetite impact the supply chain?
Yeah, that's a great question. But I don't think Japan's new solar build would actually impact the supply chain drastically. And yes, I think some countries like India or the US are interested in scaling up their domestic manufacturing supply chain or their domestic supply chain in general for solar equipment. But I don't think Japan has like trying to expand the solar manufacturing space within Japan. On the other hand, I think Japanese government is interested in scaling up the domestic supply chain for energy storage manufacturing and also the offshore wind supply chain, but not for solar. So I think Japan will likely keep importing equipment from other countries, possibly or mainly from China.
Yes, speaking of China, then we immediately think about the module. Yeah. So when do you think will the module prices come down and for what reason?
Yeah, so we don't expect the module price to come down drastically this year. So meaning we might, we only expect a slight decline in the module prices by the end of this year. And in fact, we actually revised our module price forecast upward due to the recent cost increase, which basically postponed our cost reduction forecast from the previous forecast. And if you look at the, solar market right now, the polysilicon supply market is currently tight, and that's why we are seeing the higher polysilicon prices as I showed in my presentation. But at the same time, we expect a higher output of the polysilicon supply will be available, and that should be kind of ease the supply, situation in the second half of the year. And similarly, I think the cell prices to decline around the third quarter of this year.
Thank you. And I think you have already touched a bit in your slides that the generation cost for solar and for renewables in Japan is relatively high compared with other countries. So is solar cheaper than coal in Japan now? Or if not, when do you think will be the break-even point?
Yeah, so as I showed in my presentation, currently solar is not cheaper than new coal. So in our forecast, we expect solar will be cheaper than new coal or new even gas from the mid-2020s. But this is something I didn't mention in my presentation, but actually existing coal will remain cheaper than new solar throughout 2050. So this meaning running cost of the existing coal will be cheaper than new solar even in 2050. And this is quite big challenge for Japan's decarbonization, because what this means is that once coal power plants are built, operating existing coal will be cheaper than solar. So if you just think about economics of each project, it will likely that coal power plants will remain online throughout 2050. So I think to kind of prevent such situation, I think Japan or the Japanese government needs to consider implementing higher carbon tax as Singapore kind of recently proposed. So I think Japan could follow what Singapore did in terms of carbon price or the carbon tax. And also, I think from the policy perspective, Japan to phase out emission-intensive coal power plants, I think Japan could consider implementing more stringent coal phase-out policy rather than the current one, which is quite weak. So I think, that'll be my take.
Thank you. And with regard to the most exciting part of this market right now, that would be the corporate PPA. And you talked about the on-site PPA. What about the future of off-site PPA, or we say non-physical PPA? what kind of companies are buying this clean energy, and what do you think can be the main driver for their motivation?
Yeah, so the chart that I showed was actually corporate PPAs using offsite projects. But yeah, since I showed the chart, maybe I can talk about a few of the most notable corporate PPA deals announced or included in the chart. So I think the first one would be Amazon Web Service. So Amazon Web Service announced corporate PPA, I think 22 megawatt solar PPA in 2021. And this deal basically gets some support from Mitsubishi Corporation. Mitsubishi Corporation's power retail arm called NC Retail Energy. And I think the other notable corporate PPA deals was NTT Communication Group. So NTT Communication Group announced 70 megawatt solar PPA deals. I think, yeah, this year, so in May, I think. And I think one of the interesting trends we see in corporate PPAs market in Japan is that instead of having or signing a large corporate PPA deals, Japan's corporations tend to sign a large number of corporate PPA deals for small scale solar projects. For example, I think Amazon Web Services deal to the 22 megawatt solar one is actually involving 450 small scale solars. So if you divide 22 megawatt by 450, you can see how small each project is basically. And a similar thing similar things can be said for the NTT's projects. So I think, yeah, using large number of small scale projects are basically something that we are seeing in the market right now.
Yes, the project size is changing, the offtake mechanism is changing. I believe different solar developers will have different taste of sweet and bitter. So any recommendation for them?
Yeah, so I think, I guess I mentioned in my presentation again, but I think huge business opportunity or success factor around Japan's solar sector is basically lying in corporations' big appetite for clean electricity, especially in Japan, because a lot of corporations want to source clean electricity. And I think solar would be one of the ideal technology, because if they want to, if the corporation wants to source electricity, let's say this year or next year, basically they can build solar projects. On the other hand, wind projects usually take 6 to 8 years to develop. So it's unlikely that they can just, I mean, it's possible, but it will take some time. So I think solar would be ideal technology for them. And I think in terms of, I guess, economics, since subsidy levels for feed-in tariff or feed-in premium are now lower than the retail tariffs that CNI customers are currently paying. So I think this is a quite good opportunity from both clean energy buyers side and also clean energy developers side, because from clean energy buyers side, they might be able to pay lower for the electricity bill if the corporate PPA deals or solar PPA can be bilateral contract for their project can be below what they're paying. But from clean energy buyers side, I think now subsidy for feed-in tariff or feed-in premium are lower than that rate. That means if they can sign a bilateral contract with clean energy buyers, that means their revenue will be higher. And compared to feed-in premium, they might not be or the subsidy levels doesn't fluctuate based on the wholesale power prices. So in terms of that, I think there's more certainty around the revenue from developers' perspective. So I think, yeah, corporate PPAs, also clean power procurement in general, I think that's where a lot of potentials, especially the solar sectors, I guess, yeah, there.
Yeah, thank you. So to wrap up the overall interview, if you can summarize your ideas on the Japan solar market in one word, what would the word be?
One word would be challenging. So I might use a few words. So I would say challenging, but I think exciting.
And why?
Yeah, so challenging, I mentioned in my presentation, we've seen a lot of some hurdles around the development, and also lowering subsidies for feed-in premium or feed-in tariff. And also, I guess it's just very difficult to find project sites these days, so the development risk may be high. But in terms of exciting side, I think now, as I said, a lot of corporations sign up for RE100, and in Japan, actually, there are more initiatives, not just RE100, but there's a group called RE Action, which is basically smaller corporation which couldn't sign up for RE100 are pledging to like offset their electricity with 100% renewables. And I think momentum is like there. So the next phase that Japan will see is that these companies actually take an action in terms of clean power procurement. And I think solar can play a huge role in that space. So I think, yeah, that's why I think it's an exciting market to be.
Yes, and I think also we need to pay appreciation to experts like you who are propelling the Japan market forward. So again, I really appreciate you coming today and sharing with a very honest viewpoints.
Thank you.
Yes, and also I hope that we can have the opportunity to meet in person in one of our upcoming events in Japan.
Yeah, that'll be wonderful.
Okay, thank you. This is the end of today's talk. I appreciate your watching.